to Psychedelics. Today, this is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have John Selby. This is a really fun episode. John was not really on my radar, but John has been around and doing this work for a long time. And he recently wrote a book called Cannabis for Couples that you should check out. And there's going to be some apps coming out soon as well to help you with that. Really interesting stuff. I was very impressed with John, and I really hope to get him back on the show. I don't want to ruin too much with the intro, but he's active as a spiritual coach, formerly working as a kind of a therapist. And I think you're going to like this one. I'm definitely going to be getting involved in that app once it comes out, kind of like meditations for cannabis, and potentially loads of them. So that's great. And yeah, if you know people who are boomers or folks that are in a relationship that are just kind of curious about cannabis, like this could be a great book for them to check out. Say like, yeah, now this stuff's legal in your state or decriminalized in your state. Maybe check this thing out, and perhaps it'll give them, more happiness in their lives and better relationships, all that kind of stuff. So I hope you enjoy this episode with John Selby. I think that's it for the intro part. If you want to support us, you can leave us small monthly donations at patreon.com/psychedelics today. You can leave us a review on Facebook or your podcast app or iTunes. And if you want to go a little further, we've got a great Facebook group, facebook.com, and just search Psychedelics Today group. We also have a lot of education, including a professional psychedelic education for therapists and clinicians. You can get CEs. And if you want to learn more about that, visit psychedeliceducationcenter.com. The next round starts up September 17, and seats are selling quickly. So if you want to join us, better book your spot now. And people are loving the class, and I'm loving teaching it along with Kyle. So check it out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And I think that's it for now. We will see you on the other side. Thank you all for listening. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have John Selby. John, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.
So you, before we get into your recently published book, I kind of want to introduce who you are. You've got an interesting background. We were just chatting that you were at a psychedelic research center in New Jersey, like a little outside of Princeton in your early days. Can you tell us a little bit about that or what you were doing there?
Yeah, it's a fairly complex story that hasn't been told. I'll chat a bit about it. And I basically don't hold anything back anymore these days. But when I was a junior at Princeton, in rat psych and so on, very bored with psychology at the time, in 1966, I signed up to be a research subject at a hypnosis research center. And when I got out there, step by step, I found out it was basically a mostly secret United States government NIH psychedelic research center, which no one had ever heard of. There were 7 of them set up by John Kennedy and his brother especially, who actually took LSD out at the center, Mm-hmm. All this stuff happened. And so I worked there for 2 years, and Humphrey Osmond, the fellow who coined psychedelics, who had been doing LSD research up in Saskatchewan, showing the amazing ability to help cure alcoholism with LSD. He was the head of it. A remarkable human being, by the way. His story, actually someone is working on telling his story right now. He was the therapist. He was a psychiatrist. Once a month, similarly, he came by for all-day therapy session while I was there. And that's where I met Alan Watts, who really befriended me and was a wonderful influence in my life for the next few years until he died. And so I just fell into a very deep study of LSD, which was Humphrey Osmond's dream to do this research. And it was just amazing research. We were also using hypnosis, and we seen how you could induce this psychedelic state with hypnosis, seeing what the parameters were for the two. Very, very complex and interesting stuff. And what happened was when Johnson got in, his his daughter took LSD in the White House, totally freaked out, and Johnson shut down all 7 of the research centers, boom, like that. And that was it. Meanwhile, I had done I got an NIH grant, even before I graduated from Princeton. I don't know who was pulling these strings, to do the first quantitative EEG study of heavy LSD users to see if their brains were being damaged. And so I did this. I used all my friends at Princeton. There weren't many of us taking LSD at the time. And so I did that study. And very bizarre things happened there, because once I got done with the study, all the data, 10 feet of the old type of, computer cards, went over to the Forest Hall Research Center, and somebody programmed it and ran it. And they came up with massive brain damage for LSD users compared to the control group at Princeton. And I just happened to know the head of the statistics department at Princeton, and I showed them what they'd done, and he hit the roof because they had totally abused the entire structure of the program. He ran all of it and got zero difference between the two groups, except that the control group was more neurotic and this, that, and the other than the people taking LSD. And so this whole thing blew up in my face. I quit the Institute mostly because Alan Roth was very much involved right at that time. He said, you just got to get out of this. You don't know what you're in. Get out. And so, and he set it up where I could get a draft deferred job, draft deferment. It was, the war. And so I went to seminary in San Francisco that Alan set up, and I just left that whole world. And 18 years later, we finally, through the Freedom of Information Act, found out that the whole thing had been an MKUltra CIA mind manipulation project. MKUltra?
Oh yeah. Hopefully the listeners do too.
So that's why I say this is complicated, because Humphrey Osmond was one of the most beautiful human beings I ever met. And he was working with the CIA, MKUltra.
Right.
The whole thing's very bizarre.
Sometimes they call it an unwitting accomplice. That's tough.
Yeah, I think that he figured that he was outsmarting them. And
right.
Anyway, so I began, very heavy into the research with LSD and mescaline, and not much psilocybin at the time. And then I went to seminary, and we a whole group of us at the seminary were basically dodging the draft and going to seminary, because we thought that, joining the church would be better than joining the army. And it turned out it was hardly true, because I ended up, after 4 years, excommunicated from the Presbyterian church. As the first person in 73 years to be excommunicated from the Presbyterian church.
That's amazing.
Because I had been teaching my youth group yoga and meditation, Buddhist meditation. Anyway, it was a wild time back then. To be in San Francisco in 1972 when Berkeley shut down and everything, it was pretty intense. So anyway, that's a bit of where I came from. Then after a jaunt down at the American Film Institute and trying to, I'm a writer also, trying to get some spiritual screenplays happening down there and failing, I went to a Neo-Reichian, the Radix Institute, and got my therapy license. And then I got kicked out of that organization 5 years later because I insisted on having a spiritual dimension to the therapy program. And the Reichian tradition absolutely, didn't allow that. So I kind of got banged out of one institution after another. I came from a cattle ranch, so I was kind of an odd duck in academia anyway. And anyway, and since then, I just continued as a therapist and a spiritual counselor, wrote a bunch of books, had a bunch of wild adventures down south, and finally ended up here 10 years ago in Santa Cruz, thinking naively that I could have some sort of positive effect on the whole tech industry and use technology actually to further and augment higher consciousness rather than, what it often does, that whole story. And so I worked with Microsoft on a really interesting mindfulness app. I kind of had been at the beginning of the mindfulness movement, wrote a bunch of books in that genre. And then I shifted over to another corporation, Plantronics, and did a big app project with them, trying to raise really offer the workers. So I've always been on the side of the workers, I must admit, that work could be meaningful and that they could have a mindfully beautiful experience while they're working. I found out that basically, no. I developed an app that was going to go into 85% of all of the headphones of the world for all the people who were in call centers. They really needed help, And this went all the way through. It was a $5 million project we ended up doing with Plantronics, and did all the testing 18 months, really learned how to build apps and how to do this stuff with apps. And right when it was time to do the funding and to launch this as their first software product in their headphones, two people on the board, these two old guys, very Presbyterian guys, they decided that I was some sort of subterfuge revolutionary trying to undermine American capitalism.
Of course.
And I had to say, I think you got that just about right. So about 4 years ago, I dropped the whole thing. Somebody gave me $50,000 of funding. And since then, we've been building a really super app. And it's coming out in two forms, I think, in about 2 weeks. It's been slowed down a bit. The one app goes with my new book, which is the Cannabis for Couples. And the other is for people not using marijuana, but it's basically the same app. But it's everything that I found as a therapist and spiritual guide that's really, really effective. And we're helping people to focus their attention in directions that augment higher consciousness. Because, we can either get stoned or we can get high. And the choice, people don't realize that really they have the choice. So some people. So a lot of my work over the last 10 years, because I've done a lot of work with couples using cannabis to improve their relationship, I've focused there. Now my new book is this book, Cannabis for Couples. And the new app that's coming out is the High Together app. And so I'm very much focused right there at this point. How can we use the app format as a consciousness tool? The book gives people kind of the intellectual understanding of my program, but the app is really at the heart. Once you read the book, you'll want the app because it's audio and video guidance. Literally 2,000 short guided sessions or inputs. I've been collecting for years and years. Finally, we have it all together. It took us 4 years. This was a job. So that people can get high and they can come, and it's all based on synchronicity. You just spin the surprise wheel and out of all that's possible that you can get, see what you get. And it comes up and it plays. So you never have, when you're high, often you don't want to make decisions. And so you can just spin the wheel and see what, in terms of synchronicity, comes to you, experience it, and it basically aims your attention when you're high in a direction that, has really proven over and over and over will be a rewarding direction to focus on and to go into when you're high.
It's a really cool idea, John. Like, most people don't realize that you can use cannabis as a really interesting and powerful tool for change and impact, and amplifying that with a software tool like this sounds amazing, especially with how popular and commonplace cannabis is becoming these days in the States and everywhere else. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, and also how strong it's becoming.
Yeah,
how strong it has become. Yeah. People used to think, well, there's psychedelics and then there's marijuana, and marijuana isn't a psychedelic. Well, that was back when we were smoking stems and leaves from Mexico in the old days. I personally, we're talking about doing a mushroom trip here just in a few months because we haven't done it for a long time. But I basically felt that with psychedelics, when you get the message, you hang up the phone. That it's an initiation rite that brings you into an awareness, and just taking it all the time isn't necessarily what it's all about. It's having the realization and then continuing. But I found that that marijuana, cannabis, definitely can be a regular spiritual additive. My wife and I use it, 3 or 4 times a week in the evening. But what we do is we've developed this program mostly together, been 35 years. What we found is that there are, in fact, 7 stages most people go through most of the time when they get high on cannabis.
Mm.
And the book, Cannabis for Couples, very clearly outlines what each of those 7 stages is and how you can move through them to your best advantage as a couple. And that's what the book is mostly about. And the app itself, really only 10% is specifically about guidance while you get high. It's designed, I really feel for the boomers, because there's someone had the statistic, there's at least 10 million boomer couples in the next 2 or 3 years who are going to try marijuana for the first time.
Yikes! Wow.
I'm really concerned that they don't. I'm really concerned about helping them to do that successfully and positively and safely.
Mm.
So we have 10 5-minute guided audio sessions that sort of help couples who haven't used it before approach cannabis and get prepared for it properly. Because Humphrey Osmond, he was the guy who also came up with the whole notion of set and setting, just how important it is for the psychedelic to assume some responsibility and control over the mindset that you're in when you get high and the environment that you're in. So this app is basically aiming to help people really, at a very deep level, make sure that their set and setting is advantageous, and then just to give them springboards for which they can launch themselves into an experience that has been proven to, A, to be safe, no anxiety or anything, but B, to really stimulate deep relating, deep encounter in a couple relationship.
Yeah, and that's huge these days. Like, one of the major disorders of the day is alienation. And even in your closest relationships, you can still feel alienated. So having some sort of regular practice that's safe might feel risky, but for deep connection is huge. Intimacy in relationships is huge. So it's really great.
But I must say that this whole Corona experience, like I just did a podcast called High in the Time of Corona. I think that and friends of mine in the cannabis industry here, they have 50 to 80% increase in sales in the last 3 months. And it's a boom because it is really the best thing to take to deal with the negative psychological aspects of this thing we're all going through together. It's a wonderful, wonderful helpmate. So I'm also really wanting to get this app out so that people can approach cannabis in a way that helps them through this period, especially with the intimacy issue.
Yeah,
it's just such a helpmate if used and understood properly in a relationship, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah. In this time of Corona, it's a really tricky time. It's a really kind of introverted, kind of reflective time for a lot of folks. It's a lot of folks are just hiding their head in the sand and hoping it ends, but it could be a lot longer than we really want. And having this kind of practice that's accessible, it sounds to me like it's going to be accessible to all sorts of folks, not necessarily folks that have spent hours and hours listening to Alan Watts or Tim Leary kind of lecture, but does the app sound like it? Do you plan on the app to be really accessible and kind of speak to the majority of Americans?
Absolutely. I just got a wonderful business partner down in LA who wants to promote it to the boomer generation, especially. And we've decided it's going to be free with donations, not charge anything, and really just make it financially accessible to everyone. But I'm not. I grew up on a cattle ranch. I'm not very esoteric, real pragmatic, and I really care for the average person. And I've hung out in a lot of sort of high psychedelic circles. I still am in a couple of wonderful, circles of people very deep into the research. At the same time, most of the people, they really need help in kind of the basics. It's very scary for most people. If you're 60 years old and you've never basically let go control of your ego, it's like, whoa. So I'm there, the first thing I'm there is to help people make it safely and enjoyably through that first 10 minutes when you actually have the muse of marijuana come in and say, okay, here we go, let go. There's nothing you can do about this. So enjoy the ride, right? It's like getting on the roller coaster and realize you can't get off. That's always a psychedelic experience. And to help people just settle in and get grounded and spiritually centered and enjoy the ride, really. Most of my spiritual tradition, I would say, is in the Native American tradition in terms of what works in its deep. I grew up on a cattle ranch right next to the Pima Indian Reservation, and my dad was the cattle trader with the Pimas and Papago. So early on, I had this heavy hit of an alternate, culture. In fact, right now, I don't mean to jump around, but I ghostwrite books now and then for people who have amazing stories but can't quite get it out. Right now, I'm telling the story of the Count and bringing into the our cultural view, a remarkable shaman down in Peru. And, so I deeply respect the non-academic, non-intellectual approach to spiritual awakening, the initiation rites and so on that they do. And just a little bit of that thrown into, my app really helps people to just get grounded, in the earth, in their bodies. It's very much into embodiment. Marijuana, it can take you off, but it can also bring you right into your breathing. I noticed that you're doing breathing work. And when I was in Europe, I spent 7 years in Europe, in Berlin, West Berlin at the time, where a woman named Ilse Mittendorf, who's one of the great old breathwork people out of the Reiki and Wilhelm Reich's tradition. Cool. So I studied with her, and I did some Feldenkrais and certainly loads of Reiki and breathwork. And marijuana is just, especially if you're smoking it, it's just so much into breathing. And probably a third of my app is just focused on helping people stay with their breathing, to be quite honest, and to use the breath to move them into experience. Something you and I could talk about a lot, I think.
Yeah. We were actually just recording about Reich an hour ago. So it's cool to see him come up twice in a day. And that's really fascinating.
Yeah, the whole thing is, I'm so excited at 74 at where things are at in the world, to be quite honest. People holler at me, but I think even the virus is Mother Earth's way of saying, hey, I'm shaking you guys up. Look at death, because we've gotten very soft as a culture and spiritually soft too. And I think the psychedelics are kind of, they've always been there. The psychedelics really are the Earth's gift to humankind. They didn't make us not take ourselves so seriously, but just to, it's just the spiritual awakening tools the Earth gives us if used right. And I'm, a lot of people complain about the youth of today and all this stuff. It's like, hey, I remember when they were complaining about me being the youth of today. Power to the revolution. The human species really needs to grow fast and mature and assume responsibility for how we use our awareness, how we use our focus of attention.
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for letting me babble.
No problem at all. So you've got just like a fascinating background. Obviously, we kind of touched on that a little bit. You've done a degree in pastoral psychology at Berkeley and a degree in family counseling, which is amazing. Was that one degree or two?
Oh, it was a twin degree. When I
Okay.
was at the seminary, the San Francisco Theological Seminary, and they were teams of the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley. And I did my pastoral psychology degree through the seminary, because that's what therapists do there. But I was doing my family counseling work over at the university.
Oh, that's fascinating. Great. And so it was heavily influenced by Watts?
None of that was, okay. Alan was a very complex character too, because the spiritual muse spoke through him pretty much only and he'd have a few belts of whiskey under his belt. And so he was a complex and, like all of us, flawed character. Died early because of alcoholism. But he came in and really sort of became my father, because my father had disinherited me at the time. And a remarkable person whose story has not yet quite been sung either, I think, because, his organization wants to basically kind of, they don't want to show all of him, but I think showing all of him really makes him come much more alive, at least for me. It did for me.
Yeah, knowing some of those warts makes me appreciate him more. Yeah, it's certainly not a super pretty story, but he's still impacted my life tremendously, and I never even met him.
When I was last year, I was at seminary, 1972. He'd been an Episcopalian minister, and he started out as a minister. And so he really wanted to see if the church in 1972 was open finally to where he could find a place there and be accepted. And the seminary was very radical at the time, and they brought him in as a lecturer. And every Friday night for 2 semesters, he came to the seminary, and for 3 hours, I think it was his last lecture series that he gave. We didn't record it. Can you believe that? We didn't record it.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, that was such a deep experience. Hundreds of people came. It was just stuffed, a very wonderful, amazing, with someone like him, he's really allowing spirit to speak through him. He did all the academic work. He had all the intellectual concepts and all of this stuff. But when he would start talking, something would happen. Everyone felt it. He would just sit there, and suddenly he'd just shift. And this voice would speak through him. And Bhagwan Rajneesh was another one of my really influences. Osho, he would do the same. Just this deep quality of wisdom would, first of all, both of them would first of all make really contact with the group and feel the aura of the group. And then it would be an interaction of what happened between the group's needs and what the speaker had to say. Yeah.
Yeah. This idea of becoming like a guru or a leader is interesting to me. It's always seems to come up quite regularly in the psychedelic world, and it's a fascinating thing, because it's really just about talking about the way things are often and giving people an opportunity for transcendence of some kind. And like the Osho, Rajneesh, really interesting character, and he certainly allowed people to transcend, and that was a big thing that was happening in that era that you've been chatting about here. Same thing with Watts. Just listening to Watts seemed like a transcendent experience often. Didn't really have to do much.
Absolutely, yeah. The other fellow who deeply influenced me, because I grew up part of my time on my granddad's ranch in Ojai, was this fellow Krishnamurti. Have you heard of him?
Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, yeah. Kind of raised in the Theosophical Society.
Oh, were you?
Really fascinating guy with quite the pedigree.
Yeah, because when I was like 3 and 4 years old, my aunt was taking me to listen to him in the Oak Grove in Ojai.
Oh man!
And he came to my little private nursery school and kindergarten that I went to, and he lived just around the corner up in Ojai 6 months of the year. So he also was one of the deepest. He was the deepest influence in my life, I must say.
He's certainly one of my favorite writers and speakers in spirituality for sure.
Yeah.
He was raised by the Theosophical movement, kind of groomed by them to become the new world teacher, quote unquote. But he kind of pulled back eventually and kind of did his own thing, which was better by a long shot.
Yeah, they wanted him to be the new,
hanging out with the Theosophists.
Yeah, they wanted him to be the new Christ. and
absolutely.
When he was 21, he said, "Sorry, no way."
Yeah.
And these days, of course, the new gurus, like you were saying, the new teachers are all around, but the model doesn't quite hold anymore. I think the people are sort of struggling, looking to see. I think that we're realizing that we're all shamans and gurus and teachers. We have that deeper wisdom within us. And for me, the psychedelics are a tool that enables us for each of us to discover that within us, and not to be looking for a teacher outside who's going to, magically touch us and awaken us.
Absolutely. An interesting phenomenon out here, and I noticed you have him as a blurb writer on your book, Daniel McQueen. We've become quite friendly.
Oh, yeah? Oh, wonderful. There's another guy. Yeah. Great.
And he's just in Boulder doing really fascinating work with cannabis. Yeah. And it's just, it speaks to like how accessible this stuff could become, or can become, or will become, I guess, and how impactful it can be. It's just amazing to see what he's been able to do as a therapist. Yeah, he's certainly not an extrovert either, and he's been able to pull this whole thing off.
Yeah, and he's just now. I was just talking with him a week ago. He's really eager to get the app and to use it in his programs.
Good.
And because he has a book coming out with Inner Traditions too. Inner Traditions is becoming the voice, really, of all of this.
Yeah, totally.
But what Daniel is doing is really what the basic vision that we had way back when was that the guide was very important, and because then you could just let go and trust. And Daniel is just busy training people, to be psychedelic sitters. And this is really, for me, important. Marijuana is really safe. It's not so very strong, but it's like you can definitely jump in and do it on your own and all's fine. I'm a pretty cautious voice when it comes to the stronger psychedelics, to be quite honest. It's nothing to play with. It's very, very powerful stuff. And what Daniel is doing in training psychedelic sitters, basically guides, I think is absolutely important and needs to be supported however we can. That's I want to say, Humphrey Osmond proposed to the U.S. government, the federal government, I think through Bobby Kennedy, LSD centers. He felt that everyone who wanted to take LSD, certainly that it was such a positive thing to transform and heal neurosis and so on, mental illness, that everyone should have the opportunity for free to go to a psychedelic center with a trained guide and have the experience. This was 50 years ago that was proposed. Just now with Johns Hopkins, University and so on, this is all happening. I mean, I'm glad it happened before I died, because it's nice to see that these things can finally come to fruition. And I don't, by the way, I intend the High Together app to definitely play that role. I feel it for marijuana. I think it fully suffices to have my audio voice guiding people and there to support them when they get high on marijuana. With the psychedelics, I'm not saying that this is taking the place of a real life guide with the stronger psychedelics. I want to make that clear. A lot of people will use it, and it'll be very helpful in that regard, because when you're on a psychedelic, if you can just spin the wheel and know that what's going to come up as an audio or video input will be positive and that you can trust it, that's one step away from having a live guide. But a live guide who is with you, what goes on is just, there's a very deep, the guide can really know how to guide you at that level. When I bombed out of Princeton, and for a while I basically had no money and no nothing, and a pregnant wife in San Francisco, a friend of mine in the math department at Berkeley set me up $100 a day. It was wonderful pay back then. And I guided, I think, the majority of the physics and math department professors on LSD trips. It was a very intense. Wow. He was in the department. He was like, said, you guys should do this. And what I wanted to share is that the experience I had with these math professors and physics professors, when they would start on LSD talking about the visions they were seeing that transcended their intellect, the whole notion of a contact high was very strong, very strong.
Well, that's really amazing. It would be really amazing if we could do that at a few other universities, just to give them that opportunity.
I think we're coming in that direction, and people like you who are doing this really wonderful communication work. My hat's off to you, because
thank you.
The more we share and talk about this and approach it mindfully. My website is mindfullyhigh.com, because I feel the whole notion of getting mindfully high. 5 years ago, people never put those two words together. The mindfulness people were against drugs, and the people using psychedelics, didn't fit into the mindfulness serious meditation group. I'm really into bringing the two together.
Right. And it's a great tool for, getting out of your own way. You've probably seen these folks that have been doing Zen meditation for 15 years, and, perhaps they made some progress, but they haven't really had that transcendence they're looking for yet.
Yeah.
Which is kind of tragic.
I hate to step on their toes, because I went very deeply into the Buddhist meditative tradition, and I didn't find what I was seeking for, what I was seeking.
Right.
I think that you mentioned Will Johnson, because he's really stepping forth with what he calls the Buddhist Reformation. Because, Buddha didn't say don't smoke dope, don't take psychedelics. Buddha said don't get intoxicated. There's a big difference.
Right, like clouding the mind.
Yeah, there's a big difference between getting stoned or getting drunk and using the same chemical in a very different way. You can use anything, any tool, positively or negatively. And I guess for me, we're in a civilization, the American civilization, to be quite honest, is pretty adolescent. When you look at a lot of the ways people make decisions and so on, it's not very responsible. We're certainly seeing that in the Corona situation. And I feel that the psychedelics, and especially I'm very much a fan of marijuana as a transformation tool in society, that marijuana is somehow just naturally, very quickly moving into position to have a major effect on our society. And I think if we help guide it, a very good effect. So for me, all the work I'm doing now is kind of out of a sense of responsibility. I was given a lot of opportunities and insights and so on in my earlier years. And there's a pretty sober sense of responsibility that we really have a world civilization that can really self-destruct if we don't wake up and act. And I think that cannabis and psychedelics are powerful medicine to help us in that direction. And then I must say, one of Alan Watts' greatest lines I don't actually see mentioned anymore. He said that life is so serious that if you take it seriously, it will kill you. He meant that really seriously. And then he had one of the greatest laughs of all time. And one of the wonderful things about marijuana is that it helps us laugh. It's just, laughter therapy, I think, is golden. It's right on the edge of an orgasm in terms of releasing all the wonderful, hormones and so on. But you can do it in public.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of my favorite interventions for when I'm really down or something bad happened. There's nothing really beats it for me. Like going to a comedy club or just watching super funny films.
Yeah.
Or stand up. It's just kills me. And just being with friends and having the jokes go round and round for hours. Like how ecstatic is that really? It's like a really changing situation.
Yeah, it really is. There's an inflow of spirit when we laugh, I think.
Is there any, have you been exposed to any religious literature on that, like through your training?
In terms of laughter?
Right.
The deepest thing I came to laughter was the Papago and the Pima Indians. My mother and father really were down on them for something, but especially because when something bad happened, they laughed. They just roll on the floor laughing when something incongruous, bad or good, happened. But later on, my dad realized that they would just very quickly release the trauma. It's just a great PTSD healer, and it would just release the trauma, and they would go on and be able to act. Whereas if the same event happened to my dad with them, he'd for days be knocked off center. But in terms of laughter therapy, I haven't studied much of the literature on it, but I know that there were people about 10, 15 years ago who were doing loads of laughter therapy. Do you remember?
Yeah, I've heard about it. I don't know offhand who they were, though. But it was certainly a trend for a bit. Unfortunately,
a lot of the very deep things are seen as trends and go away. I for instance, trained in the bioenergetic tradition of Alexander Lowen.
Right.
And it was phenomenal integration of Wilhelm Reich's work with spiritual work and energy work. And these things, he died and it sort of disappears because it was all centered around him. I think these things just keep coming up in different forms, actually.
Right. It's cyclical. You kind of have to rebrand it. Like as soon as that charismatic leader goes away, like the followers don't necessarily have that same pull. We're kind of seeing that with holotropic breathwork now. You saw it with Freud. Like most religious traditions that kind of have a strong following because of the founder seem to have like a fracturing after that founder leaves. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just confusing historically, I think. Like Alexander Lowen is still quite represented in the somatic psychology world.
Oh, good. Is he?
As far as I understand it, yeah. And Reich is recognized as like the founder of somatic psychology, as far as I can tell, too.
Well, when I lived in Europe, I lived in West Berlin, and there was still a very strong presence of Wilhelm Reich because he lived there for 4 years. He got kicked out of one city after another, What a revolutionary guy he was.
Oh my
God. He was my hero back then. It was like, wow. I mean, he was a weird duck too. And I was lucky enough because Chuck Kelly, who was one of his 4 primary disciples and students who founded Radix Therapy, he was he was the head of the Radix Institute where I did my formal training in his tradition. It was all breathwork. I mean, wow. I don't mean to make a statement like that, but it was based on breathwork.
Yeah. Yeah, because Reich, as far as I can tell, started most of his therapy sessions with like 10 to 20 minutes of breath work before doing any kind of like body work or talk therapy. And that seems to be really, impactful. Like that's why he was so, I don't want to say better, but perhaps more comprehensive than Freud was, just doing talk. But, that's kind of how it goes, right? You start somewhere and then people experiment and find things that are better, hopefully, and help people more.
Yeah, and hopefully we're all participating in that ongoing evolution.
Right,
and
absolutely.
The psychedelics are just really a multiplicator of all of that. An accelerator is what it is. There's also, there's something, and we were talking about from the beginning with Humphrey Osmond. He was saying that when people take LSD, that something definitely happens. In the same way that when a shaman does a rite or ritual or initiation with you, there is an energetic transference. And I actually like the current model that people are talking about, that you're really rebooting your computer. That all of the programming that went off haywire in a fear-based, in a neurotic, constrictive reaction of the organism, that the psychedelics have the ability, maybe even neurologically, to really to rewire and to kind of just reboot and to refresh and bring us back to our basic human programming that has gotten distorted by experience and culture and trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you said you did training at the Radix Institute?
Yeah, down in Ojai. Mm-hmm.
Down in Ojai. Okay, cool. And it was explicitly Reichian?
Oh, absolutely. It was called Neo-Reichian.
Neo-Reichian.
Okay. And Chuck Kelly, he was the radical. He was the younger radical in that group when Reich was in America. And yeah, he and his wife Erica were very, very advanced, powerful teachers. The Radix therapy, when he disappeared and retreated from all of that, so like Osho did. Anyway, Radix, I left Radix too at that point because, the whole therapy institution and mindset, but for me, it simply didn't get the job done. Mm-hmm. Something deeper than talk therapy needed to actually affect transformation. And the trouble with Chuck was that he wouldn't allow any spiritual element, no meditative element. It was really great for emptying people of all of their shit, but what do you fill that space with, And I found that with my clients, that was really just the first third of the process that I took people through as a therapist. And the other 2/3 was very deep, going deeper and deeper into spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. Not within any context, but just we have a natural. I just love human beings, to be quite honest. Mm-hmm. We have so much vast potential. And you take LSD or mushrooms or something, all of a sudden you go, my goodness gracious. Yeah. All of that is me, and yet we have the ability to go around with our heads just ducked down and basically unconscious. Mm. I also get hollered at when I talk about people as biorobots, but we are biorobots. At our basic level, we will function as biorobots, even if we are totally dead spiritually. Mm-hmm. So we have this base of our ego keeps us alive and functioning here on the planet. But then it's like, well, okay, who are we really? What are we going to do with the potential that this vast brain that we has? Furthermore, what are we going to do with the fact that we happen to be plugged into the entire universe, into an infinite spiritual reality?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
Exactly. Yeah. It's amazing. And, this is perhaps where Maslow was, right? Like before transpersonal states kind of came in and transpersonal psychology happened. It's like, you're kind of just surviving at a certain point until you kind of hit these certain opportunities or something passes you by and kind of opens you up more. Or, okay, you've got everything now. You've got that big fancy lawyer job. Now what? Maybe you found religion in the Amazon with ayahuasca or something. And then that opens further. But yeah. Does that seem kind of right in terms of how you're kind of phrasing that with the kind of biocomputer, kind of just survival, not too much depth at times?
Yeah, and it goes back one step deeper, which is the depth that I always go back to, is that human beings have the ability to project into the future and imagine that they're going to die.
Yeah.
And religion in the old days, I rightly got kicked out of the Christian church because I really disagreed with the fact that, that I can somehow transcend mortal death. Mm. I think it's, and so all of our lives, there's nothing more disturbing than a Christian who's afraid of what's going to happen after they die, if they're going to go to heaven or hell. It's like, what do you mean? The deeper truth is that if we really honor and embrace the fact that we come and we go, and that we are mortal biorobots, then the fear goes away of death. Mm. And as soon as the fear, which is what, I'm sure you notice this too. What the psychedelics do, especially with cancer patients and so on, people dying, is it takes away their fear of death. Well, let's study that to the hilt, because that's really where the transformation, reformation will happen. That as we let go of this chronic ego fear of death, all of a sudden it all opens up. Mm-hmm. But as long as we're afraid, as long as we're anxious in a state of fear, the whole spiritual higher level of consciousness is just collapsed entirely, right? Mm-hmm. Fear is the great destroyer of consciousness.
Yeah.
So we need to focus on, hey, what can we do to transcend this fear? And I'm sorry, but neither traditional religion or traditional therapy, they didn't get the job done, at least for me. And the psychedelics somehow do. And it will always be a mystery, I think, of what's going on. But we have a tool. And if we use the tool correctly, what a wonderful world it could be.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much power there. And there's so much beauty in the human soul. There's this quote that Stan Groff uses in a lot of his books from Les Mis. And it's something along the lines of like, there's nothing more beautiful in the universe than the human soul. Like it's far more complex and infinite than we can even begin to imagine. And psychedelics, including cannabis, can help us really unfold that, understand it better.
And to be quite honest, another reason I got kicked out of seminary and excommunicated was Alan sticking it in my ear over and over. Hey, we are all God. We really are. We are to be one with God. In the beginning was the Word, as the Bible, New Testament starts, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Mm-hmm. So that runs real deep, and it's a pretty serious responsibility. The second time I took LSD was when I realized that, wow, I am one with this. I am this. Whew. What next?
Yeah. All right. So I want to talk about your book a little bit more. So you wrote this book knowing that there's a ton of boomers that are going to be smoking cannabis for their first time. Also, there's probably a gap in the literature, a gap in the available books on cannabis showing people what they can do with it. But what was your primary objective with the book?
Well, I didn't start out just to write for boomers. And the book certainly isn't just for boomers. It's for everybody. And applies couples who've been getting high for 30 years equally value the guidance that I'm trying to provide. I wrote the book actually because I'm an old dog now, and I hadn't really stopped to really reflect on what I had observed and learned and the programs I developed with my clients. So I wanted to somehow bring these tools and techniques and processes, to everyone who wanted them. To get, I'm very much I get the tools to the people. That's what I think is really important. The tools aren't going to be of any value. The shovels is no good if it's left in the tool shed. You have to bring it out and learn how to use it. So I wrote the book to share everything that I'd learned along the way, and to put it in a format that people could then immediately apply to their own experience. And it sort of evolved step by step into really merging the notion of a psychedelic guide, as I've been trained to by Humphrey Osmond. That had kind of stuck with me all along, and of bringing that dimension into talking about cannabis and how couples could use it. Actually, really use it while they're getting high. And so these days I don't really like to get very academic or intellectual or structural. I did too much of that in my life with other books. But this book, I sort of went back to sort of a more standard, traditional way of introducing the concept and and taking people through every step of the high, chapter on each of those 7 levels, and what are the opportunities, and what can you do to go more deeply into that, and especially how can you share it with your partner. A lot of people get high and they basically drift away from the person that they're with while they're high. That's not because what the muse of marijuana is doing. That's because of old behavioral patterns that don't necessarily serve you when you're high. So a lot of the John Selby as a therapist is in this book, because I know how easy it is for couples to fall apart. How easy it is just to let fear and old patterns make you push away. And what is the process when you're high to where you can step by step with your partner begin to open up and come closer together. Hey, the Beatles said it, love is all there is. When there's a process that goes like this. It's so simple to use elicitor words and elicitor phrases to guide our attention where we want to go. If you're get high with someone and there's not much, you've lost contact and so on, definitely you're going to find that you don't feel good in your heart. And if you simply use a focus phrase, I'm loaded with focus phrases, and say, I choose to feel good in my heart for this person. And the amazing thing is that if you say it, it happens. So the app is full of focus phrases that just very simply, they're called 2-liners or 3-liners. Very simple statements of intent that aim your focus of attention exactly where you choose to go. And focus of attention is everything there is in life, isn't it, for a human being? Where you focus your attention is where you go and what you do. So this book is just loaded with examples of showing people that if they simply state their intent to move in a positive direction and align their focus of attention in that direction, which is what the app does, it aligns your attention, then, that's when the psychedelic guide or the therapist or whoever needs to get out of the way and let the person have their own unique experience.
Right.
So, So the book is a launch pad. I'd put it that way.
Well, that's great. Do you have anything in there about kind of scary experiences? Like some of my most scary drug experiences have been with cannabis, which is interesting because I've had some pretty extreme states elsewhere, but it's like, also a lot of pleasure too. But anything about like redirecting from that or protecting from that or working with those scary things?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because that's what the boomers are most afraid of, is having a bad trip. I just put up a podcast called Moving Beyond Anxiety, which if you're high and you're anxious, you're having a fear, radical reaction, the first thing you can do is have a guide or someone whose voice will guide you and refocus your attention in directions that make you simply let go of that anxiety reaction. That's a very good question because it's deeply important. We structured the app that way too, and there's a program to help you if you are anxious and how you can move out of that state while you're high. Yeah, we need to acknowledge that the ego can freak out like crazy on marijuana because you must surrender control when you get high, right? And the ego is designed never to do that. So when people get high, about half of the book is really just kind of helping people to realize that all their old fears and so on aren't necessarily relevant, and that there's a process through which you surrender your ego control to what I call the muse of marijuana. It really is kind of a spirit. There's a particular place marijuana kind of takes everybody, and it's a good muse. It's a positive spirit, and we can trust it. And yeah, I could talk for hours and hours about anxiety and fear because it's that reaction, it's the amygdala that it really fucks us up as a civilization and a species. And we need to deal with it. We do need to look and see what fear is and realize that all fear leads toward the ego's fear of dying. and the ego is going to die. So it has something to be afraid about, right? Because yes, the ego, that part of us, I'm wide open in terms of reincarnation and eternal life and so on. But for my individual personality ego, that is part of the bioorganism. And I think that does kind of go. And to let it go while we're alive frees us to move into these deeper realms, I think.
Yeah. I always have kind of a weird reaction to the ego death dialogue, but Stan Groff in one talk I recall listening to mentioned something along the lines of, well, it's, it's the thing that you think you are is going away.
Yeah.
And that's really scary. It's not necessarily. So I think in Freudian terms, it's a great catchphrase. It's like this ego thing that, thinks it is the totality of you, the protector of you is the thing that kind of dissipates. And all this other stuff is still there. And it's that like a redefining self, going, okay, what am I now? Or who am I now? It's a really powerful thing. Yeah. So anyway, John,
I work.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that I work very much with the notion of me, myself, and I. The me is really the all these beautiful animal emotions and feelings that we have. The me, and the myself. Notice it's myself. Whose self is it? And then we have the I, which is that deeper spiritual. The Buddhists hit it right on the head in terms of that deeper I that is within all of us that we actually share together. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, John, I really appreciate you coming on the show to talk about your book, Cannabis for Couples, Enhance Intimacy and Elevate Your Relationship. And also your app. What will the name of the app be? I have a feeling it might be released by the time this comes out.
The app is going to be called the High Together app. It'll be on all the usual places. And also, if you go to mindfullyhigh.com, we'll be announcing when it is available. Actually, my son is building it right now as I speak in another room in his house. And it's been a massive, massive undertaking. We had no idea how big the job would be. And it's come together so beautifully that I'm just really thankful. And that's why we decided just to give it to the world, let it go out there. A little final gift, I guess it would be said.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also, I did something very interesting. I'd never done an audiobook with my own voice before. And usually, when the audiobook comes out, they hire somebody who doesn't even read it before they read it. They don't even know what they're talking about.
Right.
And this kind of book would not work that way. But I actually spent 3 weeks recording the audio book part of it. So there's an audiobook also that will be, I think in 2 weeks will be released.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I was in talks with Inner Traditions about helping them with audiobooks for a little bit. And I'm glad they're finally doing it. They didn't really have plans for it for a long time. And I'm just really happy they stepped it up because there's so many people that just aren't going to touch books, but they will absolutely be buying audiobooks. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. And there's something in the spoken voice that transcends. Well, that's why I made this app very much focused on audio and visual programs, because as soon as you start reading, you go into a whole other part of the brain. You can see it on brain scans. But when you're listening, you can just relax and take it in. So it's a very different way to process information.
Right. And there was data showing that retention was actually higher with audio. So
yeah, right.
Certainly fascinating. And yeah, there's all sorts of different learner types, right? Some people need to see it visually.
That's why the whole format of the podcast I find revolutionary. I love the fact we moved into podcasts. I'm just shifting into that realm myself.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've been doing it for a lot longer than just psychedelics today. I was doing some occult esoteric stuff for a long time, and I found it to be an amazing way to even just learn. So if you just want to learn something, start a podcast and just start rolling. Doesn't matter if you're you don't have to be Osho to get all this education and access. You can do it yourself right now as an American or a human with a computer. I'm sure you can even do it on just cell phones now.
Yeah, it's the internet is really, we've established a planetary nervous system. It's a phenomenal thing that's happened so fast. And once again, it can go for our betterment or for our detriment. So each decision every person on the planet is making right now is influencing the outcome, right? That's a serious thing.
It really is. Yeah. I feel like we could talk for hours. I want to start raising up Teilhard de Chardin and others now, but I think we need to wrap, John. It's been a really lovely time chatting with you, and I hope we can do it again.
Hey, let's do it. And just keep up the good work. I love what you're doing.
And there you have it, everybody. John Selby. I hope you all enjoyed that. If you did, please share it with a friend. Buy the book. Maybe keep an eye out for his app as well. We'll be sharing it probably when it comes out. So stay tuned for that. So I think that's about it there. Again, if you want to support us, you can leave a small monthly donation at patreon.com/psychedelics today. You can also take one of our classes over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We've got a free course over there called 8 Common Psychedelic Mistakes, another one on spiritual emergence or psychosis, a brand new Carl Jung and psychedelics course with Johanna Hiller, and plenty of other stuff over there. A great course on psychedelics and the shadow side of psychedelia. And again, Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, which starts on September 17 and is filling up pretty quickly. So if you want to secure your spot for that round, please sign up soon. And you can learn more about all of these classes at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. I think that's it for now. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and spread the word about psychedelics today. All right. Take care, everybody. Joe Moore signing off. Bye-bye.